And welcome, Jacob. How are you
Oh,
doing this fine? It's evening for me. You're an hour, shifted. So I guess technically that's still evening, right?
yeah.
You
It's
know.
turning into evening here in Boise.
Yeah, Boise. What do I know about Boise? Um,
I
Nothing.
want to
What
hear
can?
this.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anything. It's a capital, right?
The
No.
the the blue football field, maybe potatoes.
Potatoes. There we go. Yes, Idaho potatoes. That makes sense. That Boise's not the capital of Idaho, is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
It is. Ooh,
yeah,
a capital, man. I see. Very
yeah,
nice.
yeah. You went
Yeah,
all the way back to grade school quizzes on that one.
I really did. Yeah, I did not use Google or Chat GPT or anything,
Let's see,
actually.
Topeka, right?
Topeka in Kansas. Yeah. So I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. This
Oh,
is the
Missouri.
confusing
Okay.
thing. We might as well get this out of, get
Yeah.
it out now. So there's two Kansas cities. I don't know why, but there's a Kansas City, Kansas, and there's a Kansas City, Missouri. And they have mutual aid if there's ever like a tornado, which has happened where we've had
Okay.
a tornado and they've had to request like mutual aid, ambulance and fire and police and whatnot. But yeah, different states cross the state line, different rules. And there, if you live here though, you would know certain things. You would know when the roads get nicer, you're probably in Kansas. Uh, Unfortunately, because they actually take money and then they put it into the roads. And here they take money and they put it into. I have no idea. I don't know
Yeah.
where. I don't know where it goes. But
Well, let's see, Gene. A million years ago, I was 19 and I was going to Bible college in Illinois, Quad
yeah.
Cities, and I was in a gospel quartet.
Oh,
And that,
I
yeah,
see where
right.
you're going with this. Yeah, yeah.
Well, no, that summer we drove an old Econoline van all over the U.S. And I remember driving through Missouri, and we went to Lambert's in Sykeston.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
far
Where
is
they
that from you?
It's down south a ways.
Okay,
Yeah, like closer to Springfield, if I remember correctly. I think I've
okay.
been once because that's where they throw the rolls, right?
The Throwed Rolls, right?
Yes,
Is it still a thing?
I think so. I went there once, but it's been a very long time. So,
Yeah.
um, all right, let's look it up. Let's go to the thing. Lambert's in Ozark. It says Ozark, Missouri. That sounds about right. Yeah, down near Springfield. Yeah. It's got
Well, I just remember as an
26,000 Google reviews. Pretty good for a restaurant. I mean,
it was
yeah.
a spectacle, and I mean, we were going to McDonald's and shit back then, so that was a pretty
Hmm.
big treat for us.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, nothing glorifies overabundance like a place where they're just like, we'll just throw the fucking rolls at you. Like you don't have to get up. We can, and if they
Exactly.
fall on the floor, I grew up in around Joplin, which is
Okay.
where there's a big tornado that hit there, and not far from Lambert's, probably like an hour or two away.
Okay.
But there was a place where you could go in and the appetizer was peanuts. It was kind of a hick place, and then you literally just threw the shells on the ground. And then it's great whenever you're a customer, but if you're working there, can you imagine? I mean,
Yeah.
somebody would have had to sweep up all that crap. It would have been not good.
Yeah.
So were you really going to a Bible college in Illinois,
I
or were
really
you
was.
making a reference to the usual suspects? Because
No. What are the
oh,
usual suspects?
have you sseen that movie? It's
No. Oh shit, no.
yeah.
Or if I have, it's been a long time.
Yeah, so it stars Kevin Spacey and a few others, Benicio del Toro, I think, and it's a bit of a mind fuck because everything
Okay.
twists at the end. But listen, if you haven't seen it by now, I'm sorry,
Well,
audience. But the I won't say everything, but let's just say that one of the characters pulls a lot of his story that he's telling a police officer from his immediate surroundings.
oh my God.
So
Okay.
yeah, so like there's a dry erase board or something that has a brand name on it, and he pulls that, and I think one of them was Skokie, Illinois. That's the thing is what
Oh,
gets me. And
okay.
so you said that, and I'm like, now you're fucking with me. So
No, this was legit. What's funny too, Gene, is I grew up in a particular sect, really cult of Christianity where we didn't watch any television or movies, and really no music other than just church music and classical. But
yeah,
So it's when you said that Usual Suspects, I'm pretty sure I've watched it, but until I left the church, I was around 28, I guess.
Yeah.
I wasn't seeing movies and stuff, so I've had to catch up a lot.
Well,
Yeah.
you will be the next to the last. This is my plan anyway. The next to the last episode of the first season of
Mm.
my, you know, new young show. But the last one, I'm going to give my story because I started off interviewing the first episode of the first season was with a guy that he and I kind of like talked about doing this, and then I just kind of took it and ran with it because he's busy, but he volunteered to come back and do my story, and I said, oh, that'd be great. But I've thought a lot about what caused my own deconstruction being that process where you kind of like reevaluate all your beliefs, and then some people stay in their faith and some people like me abandon it altogether. And the Usual Suspects might actually have a part in that, because the reason why it was important is that I was getting catfished at the time that right before I watched that, and a friend of mine says, have you ever seen The Usual Suspects? And I'm like, no. He's like, you should watch The Usual Suspects. So it was like he knew that the only way to get through me was through the magic of the movies. And he was absolutely correct, because I watched that and the light went off. But it was one of those things where you realize that just because you're being told something doesn't mean you have to accept it at face value, that maybe you have to dig a little deeper, ask some questions, and see how far the rabbit hole goes. And I love cult because I kind of think all religion are cults. That's my thing. And I've heard opposing arguments to that. That's fine. I'm stubborn. I'm going to stick with it. But it is fair to admit that some are far deeper than others. Because I'm Gen X, and I remember the Heaven's Gate cult pretty well. And grew up hearing about Jonestown and Jim Jones and the Flavor Aid, right? It wasn't Kool-Aid. Everybody says Kool-Aid, but it was something else. Or Right Aid, is that a thing? But anywho, I am interested in hearing your story, because let's just go back to the beginning. You were a small embryo at one point, and then you just go on from there. So tell me about your upbringing.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm really glad. Should we tell people why I'm on your show tonight, by the way?
You're on my show because you volunteered. But the reason why is that somebody else was scheduled to be here, and it was someone who was a professed Christian, and I had rescheduled once in the past because we were supposed to do it like last month, and I rescheduled, and so we rescheduled and we were going to do it. He contacted me. I sent him emails. I didn't hear anything, and then he went on and said that I canceled, and I'm like, oh yeah, I got the receipts. I did not cancel. So that's fine. I have a very low tolerance for liars, so I don't think I'm gonna ever hear from him again. So, and
I
I'm
just
cool
thought it
with
was
that,
fun that we've known each other just a little bit on Thread. So this is actually my first time meeting you this way, and it's really really great. So
well, thanks. I appreciate, and I put out the call. I'm like, well, fuck it. Does anybody want to go? I'm here. I'm ready to go. So, thank you for answering the call. And, sometimes, I tell my kids, like, the thing about life is a big part of it's just showing up. And you'll find out, because you'll go to work and you'll find out like somebody doesn't show up for work, and you're like, well, where's Steve? And you're like, I don't know. He didn't call or anything. So, thank you for showing up today, Jacob.
Oh, my
it means a lot. But, but you're the star tonight. So you tell me your story, and, we'll get into it.
Well, I'm just glad to have the conversation. It's been so long, Gene, since I left the group that I was raised in, and I didn't really get into any other groups after that. Which I'm really grateful for. But the reason I say that is, when I was leaving back in my late 20s, I had all of this. Maybe you experienced something like this. I had all this passion for debating and talking with people, and I don't generally anymore, but I really enjoy talking with people like you. I've watched you on social media and things, and
I'm
I
sorry.
appreciate having these no, I appreciate having these conversations.
Yeah.
And I feel like my take on religion in general and the state of Christianity, certainly what it's become, but even more so, the longer I've deconstructed, the more I've deconstructed, the more I feel like we need to have productive conversations about this.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and I had a really, since you asked me to go back to embryonic state, my parents were hippies. They really were.
They're hippies?
They
Yeah?
were.
Yeah.
I was conceived in the Kona coast of Hawaii. I've not been back since. I'm pretty sure they were frying on acid. I'm almost sure they were frying on acid. So I've got some tie-dye DNA in there somewhere. Um, but
That's
yeah, I was
great.
born in California, and they fled. And then, I really wouldn't have gone back that far. Except it's interesting. My mom was right in the middle of Haight-Ashbury, 1969. So I mean, she was in
Mm.
the epicenter.
Yeah.
My father was nearby, but he wasn't quite as social as she was. So they met and married, and I was born in '73. They brought me up here to Idaho. They had heard myths of free land, and turned out those weren't
Ah.
true, but they at least not livable land. So they settled here in Boise, and I grew up here till I was 12, and then went to Seattle. But my mom met this family, and they were really cool people, and genuinely they were really cool people, but they were part of this group. And I've asked my mom so many times, Gene, over the years, like, okay, so what happened? You were a leftist, radical, hippie,
Mhm.
Bolshevik, learned Russian so she could translate obscure Soviet texts, and
Wow. That's
right.
hard
And
too. Like I spent like one class in high school where
did
they
you
offered
really?
Russian. Yeah, and I think I
Yeah,
got to like Strasvoicha and Das Vidanya, and then after that,
yeah,
I'm like, this is too
yeah,
much. I'm gonna go do
yeah.
French.
Spasiba, I could say
So,
please and thank you.
spasiba, yeah.
But she just said, Jacob, we were running. We were running. We were scared. She had grown up Catholic. My dad kind of grew up without any religion, and they didn't want to get caught back in what they were running from, where they
Yeah.
felt like it was, really fake. But so they met this group, and this group, didn't use television. It was non-materialistic. They felt like they were really getting involved with a group that was, kind of close to the earth, and cared
Mhm.
about each other. What we've learned, in the years since, it's a pretty small group. It's called the Bible Missionary Church, but it carries most of the characteristics of cults, with the exception of we weren't living on a compound or something. But fearing
Right.
the outside world, most of your money going to the organization, and all of those things, mind control, behavior control, all those things were part of it. So that's a quick thumbnail, and you can dig in wherever you want.
Sure. So you grew up, you were raised in this, like you hung
Yeah.
out with, and what size are we talking about here of this, of the Bible Missionary Church?
I think around 28,000 worldwide
Oh, okay.
was their height, and we did, and I say worldwide because we did have a lot of missions in New Guinea and Nigeria and different places like that. So,
Mhm.
despite being tiny, they had a pretty evangelistic fervor for reaching folks.
Right. And so, um, if you were raised in it, you were probably like, I really lean on indoctrination just because whenever you're young, you don't really get a
Sure.
choice. You think you're choosing, but you don't really get a choice. And then as you get older, you realize you just, I don't know, it's really stuck in your head.
Yeah.
I don't know, did you guys do a Sunday school? I mean, was it pretty traditional whenever it comes to church? Did you go twice a week,
Oh,
or
we
Sunday?
went several times a week.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a Wednesday night thing. We had Sunday school, regular church. Sunday was kind of a nightmare, actually. It was just so full of. There was not a day of rest. It was jam packed with church
Funny how that
services.
works. Yeah. Yeah.
But Gene, I don't want to mess up your flow, but I really would love to hear also like what your experience was. If you don't want me to go there right now, but I would love to hear like how were you raised?
Oh, yeah, I can dive a little into it. Honestly, I didn't have a bad upbringing. It was Southern Baptist,
Okay.
so I didn't realize that was evil till I got older. Honestly, I didn't even realize that the Southern Baptist Church at one point um, was so pro-slavery I didn't even realize that till like a couple of years ago. I was like,
Yeah,
what? I didn't
yeah,
know that. And
yeah.
now I haven't been, I would say, Southern Baptist for probably, mm, I'm going to say 10 or 15 years, but but what happened was is that it's still in there though. I mean, it never really went away. I just found churches that were they shared some similar like core doctrines, I would
Okay.
say, as far as like, Trinity and or Trinitarian belief. If and please stop me if I say anything and you go, I don't know what you're talking about, because
That'd be
it's
pretty
what I
hard.
refer to as Christianese.
Yeah.
It's its own language sometimes, but wasn't overtly controlling with clothing necessarily. So I just had someone on that was yeah, definitely she was in a very controlling denomination. Jeans and t-shirts was fine. That's no big deal. Although mom and dad were not real keen on secular music, so I had to go into the I really like music. I go to a lot of concerts and stuff, and that's kind of my hobby aside from this, obviously. But I had to enjoy Christian rock, Christian metal, Christian rap. If I mean, not that I'm a rap guy, but DC Talk was and probably still is, except for recently, popular. So and then for me, it's just a lot of the rules that are in your head that kind of seep in
Yeah.
whenever you go to church, just don't do this, don't do that. But I, yeah, I don't relate to church hurt too much because things were kind of okay for the most part. I mean, um, but I did have to do things like, I don't know if you ever heard of a Bible drill.
Oh, sure.
Okay. So
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
I was good at the Bible drills, fast on the feet and and whip out my Bible. Nowadays you would just say like, hey dingus, I have to say that or else it'll activate it. But say hey dingus, open up the Bible to whatever
Yeah.
and it'll do that for you. But at least I knew where they were. And I remember my dad had a book called Kingdom of the Cults
Hmm.
by Dr. Walter Martin. And I went through that and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. Look at all of these other religions that are cults, but not mine.
Right, right.
And so there would be a lot of information about, well, this is why Catholicism is a cult, and this is why Mormonism is a cult, and this is why Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh Day Adventist. Um, I'm sorry, yours didn't reach the radar, so maybe they just weren't big enough for a publication.
No.
But the funny thing is that you never ask yourself, well, am I in a cult?
Hmm.
Or are there characteristics of this that I might apply to others? And so, why do you call the Bible Missionary Church a cult versus religion? What about it to you really stands out as being a little heavy-handed? That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'll say too, Gene, that I love that you shared that you weren't carrying around a lot of church hurt. I would say that I and most of the people I knew, especially those who have left, would all agree there was a tremendous amount of church hurt in our
Mm,
experience. We looked like Little House on the Prairie people.
okay.
The women didn't cut their hair, no makeup. I didn't wear a t-shirt outside the house till I was, left the church.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but honestly, uh,
I don't
there's
do that because I don't want to scare anybody, but that's just me.
well, yeah. And so what's interesting to me is like, I feel like I managed to do a lot of work and processing that stuff. So I don't walk around just feeling bitter anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's
And
good.
I'm grateful, right? I'm grateful for that because I know a
Yeah.
lot of church kids who haven't integrated that. I look back at it as curious. I was raised certainly outside the culture. And also, um, in terms of the actual characteristics of it, though, I mean, certainly the behavior control, how we dressed, how we looked, all those things. But there was just a really heavy-handed take on God, on heaven and hell.
Mm-hmm.
We had an extra layer in our group that was called sanctification, which was, it came down through the Wesleyan and Nazarene
Okay.
lineage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we had an extra layer there, and but the interesting thing was we viewed any group outside of our own, even those who were, you know, classic Christians, we viewed all of them as going straight to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely including the Baptists. I mean, all the Pentecost, everybody else, anybody but our weird little splinter group was
Yeah.
was going straight to hell. Um, and I remembered having, even as a kid, and I was the oldest of six kids, and kind of carried that responsibility, kind of the A student kid, so I was the kid all the parents wanted their kids to hang out with because I was a good influence. So
Yeah.
I was bought in, Gene. I was
Yeah.
definitely a true believer. And watching some of my other siblings who weren't as, they didn't buy in as much, but they went along until they left home. um it's affected each of us differently. For me, it was a very deep identity thing. And
Yeah. I
I
get that.
remember, even though as a teenager I was beginning to ask questions back then, even as someone who wasn't seeking to leave the church and wasn't seeking to question my faith, there were questions that they couldn't answer, and I, you know, probably like you, I'd read the Bible several times all the way through, and was very steeped in all of it, read a lot of theology books, but I began to have these questions. And again, when I would go and talk to any of the leaders about them, they would glass over, and it was very clear, like, hey, if you're having doubts, just pray about it.
Yeah. It reminds me of the story of Jesus whenever he's young and he goes to the temple, and then they're like, oh, he confounded, the teachers. I'm like, well, yeah, yeah, he was, yeah, because you guys
Yeah,
weren't reading. No, I don't know. I'm sure that, again, I have weird, I don't know what I think about Jesus, to be honest. I have
yeah,
no idea,
yeah, yeah.
I have at first, I mean, clearly have long believed that there was a Jesus, and then even when I left, I think I was at the conclusion that I was like, well, Jesus existed, but he wasn't divine. And then since then, doing even more research and stumbling, I mean, because most historians accept that there was a character named Jesus,
Yeah.
but was that character the one as reflected in the Bible,
Mm,
even remotely?
mm,
And I am unclear about that at this point.
yeah.
There's a professor named Dr. Richard Carrier, and he's what's known as a mythicist, so someone who believes that Jesus was actually a myth, and that
Mm,
he makes some pretty strong arguments. But I mean, he goes deep into like, well,
yeah.
whenever we look at any kind of mention of Jesus, that they're usually by people from an extra biblical
Mhm,
sense, that
mhm,
from a historical sense, it's like, well, these guys were not eyewitnesses. They were
mhm,
after the fact. And today it's 9/11. It's 24 years ago, right?
mhm,
Pretty what? Yes, 24 years ago. And if you think about the earliest record of Jesus was, I think, Mark, written about AD 70, which would be, even if you pushed it back, let's say it was AD 50 something, and they think Jesus died around 33. And I'm saying AD. I don't get hung up on the BCE, BE, whatever, and I just
sure.
don't care. But um, if you think about what you don't remember from 24 years ago, from 9/11,
Yeah.
and then think about that those guys would have tried to recall around Jesus. I'm sorry. uh, you would have to believe that it totally came from God, that all of the words came into man, and then they wrote it, mankind, humans,
Mhm,
and but that is, religious beliefs take that, they kind of want it both ways, where they're like, well, no, it's divinely inspired, or it's God breathed, and yet at the same time, uh, it's written by man, and no, they're recalling it because they were there. And I'm like, you can't have it both ways. You have to pick a
yeah,
side and tell me which one you're on, so that way we can all be on a level playing field. And Yeah, thinking about 9/11 today, I remember some details
Mm-hmm.
that are rock solid.
Mm-hmm.
But I could not tell you what anybody said that day other than, hey, maybe you should go get gas.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing I remember. That I worked at a newspaper, in the very small newspaper, and the reporter, he said, he, we were talking on the phone. He said, you should go get gas. There's lines starting to, of car lines at the gas station. That's it. That's all I remember from that day. Other than that, I went to the gym. I walked upstairs. I saw that there were, um, all the TVs were on the same channel,
Mm-hmm.
and then I watched the second plane hit, and then I was like, oh shit, this is something. And
Yeah.
I was there. I was at the gym while I was waiting to get my brakes done at a nearby shop. Went and got my car and went on to work, and the rest of the day was just it's a weird day. But to think that there was any recollection of these biblical authors and that they definitely knew exactly what Jesus said, yeah, I'm not so sure about that anymore. And then I
Yeah.
get into just asking questions about. So I get it. Historians believe this, but there were plenty of people that thought the earth was flat at one point, and there were plenty of people that thought the earth, or that the sun revolved around the earth, and that the earth was the center of the universe. So we learn new things and then we adjust.
Yeah.
And so not convinced. I'm not
Yeah,
not
I don't
convinced
think
yet.
it. It's interesting, Gene. That when I was going to Bible college, I was there for a year and a half, um, and the very first semester, I took a class. There was an old professor who was getting ready to retire, and he had a class that he had taught for a lot of years called Cults and Isms,
Mm-hmm.
and we were supposed to pick one other faith or one other religion and essentially write a critical paper on it. And I picked Buddhism because I had always been
Oh,
interested in Eastern religions. I hadn't ever really been allowed to explore them. My dad had, but he was really afraid of that.
yeah.
Yeah, after he left, being a hippie and all that. So I took Buddhism, and I was pretty shocked um, to discover, this is how little I knew about any of it. I was just shocked to discover how far Buddha had predated Jesus Christ, at least when we think he was here. And then the teachings themselves. And I wrote a paper, and you have to remember, I was an A student. I was still a very true believer. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
not attempting to be a dissident in any way, but I
Yeah.
wrote a paper that was not nearly critical enough and didn't get a great grade on it.
Oh.
And so that was one of those things. I didn't care so much about the grade. I was just like that definitely, there was a bookmark thing in there. And then I wrote the only science class we had, this was a non-accredited college, so they didn't have much in the way of math and science and things. So, but they had this class called archaeology, and I took that and I wrote a paper on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was one of those like, oh shit, there's so much more to this story they haven't told us.
Mm-hmm.
That one didn't require, I didn't have to make any value judgments. So I wrote the paper and did fine on it, but it definitely that was one of those big dangling question marks for me for the next, 10 years, that I began to pull the thread on more and more. And a lot of people, I'm not sure what your experience was as you were leaving your church, but as I was on my way out, a lot of people would come and try to talk me back into it. And they're like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that?
Mm-hmm.
Have you read this book? I'm like, guys, I've read the Apologetics. I've read all of C.S. Lewis. I actually was doing my best to stay, Gene. I was
Same.
studying these things,
Same.
trying
Yeah.
to hold my faith together. I'm like, the problem is, guys, I've done all of that work, and I'm leaving as a result of the work.
Yeah,
I'm not
right.
just rebelling,
Yeah, you're not the first person to say that exact same thing, which is, I wasn't trying to leave. Same
Yeah,
with me. I mean, I was desperately seeking something more than I had seen my entire life, because I
yeah,
just got to a point where I'm like, listen, man, I gotta have more.
yeah,
I gotta have more. Which it's so funny because I have these conversations on threads, and people are
yeah.
usually with the believers that are just head in the clouds, and they're like, if you just read the Bible. I'm like, I read the Bible every damn night with my kid,
You
like,
still do?
Oh yeah, yeah, no,
Oh wow.
because she hasn't went through it, and she's the only. I have one of 3 kids that is the only one that's willing to sit with me and do this, and so, and my wife is there. She just hears it because I mentioned the other night talking about Numbers 22 about Balaam and the talking donkey, and it was funny to hear my wife just exhale whenever I talked about the talking donkey. Um, Not only that, but some of the other things that are incredibly misogynistic, like some of the rules. We're almost through Numbers, and then we'll get into Deuteronomy. So I'm sure more fun will be had with the laws and whatnot. Um, but yeah, no, I still go through it, and so they say, well, you need to read the Bible. I'm like, well, I did that once a long time ago, and then did a lot of New Testament stuff. Because once you read through the Old Testament once, you kind of never want to do it again. It's so bad. But not all of it's bad, but there are some bad parts. And then yeah, well, you just pray about it. I'm like, I've prayed, I've fasted, I've listened
Yeah.
for the, you know, still small voice. I did all the things,
Yeah.
So tell me what else I got to do. What else should I possibly do? I mean, there's much, much, much more to that, and I'll get into that in mine, but in my recording. But yeah, I did a lot. I was searching,
Yeah.
just like you were. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to leave. And so, can we go back to Dead Sea Scrolls? Because
Sure.
I'm not that familiar with it. The closest I've got to the dead, I saw a replica. We had one come through Kansas City at our science center, and you could go. I didn't realize it was a replica. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. We should go. And my dad wanted to go, and we go to this thing, and I'm like, oh, these are just fakes, So at least you get a story. And I wasn't really that into it. I didn't even know what to think about it. And now it's funny. I think I've learned more about the Bible since I've left
Hmm.
than I ever did whenever I was in there. Probably because sometimes you weren't allowed to ask.
Sure.
It's not that you weren't allowed to ask questions, but you didn't feel that freedom a little bit. So, what was it about the Dead Sea Scrolls that jarred some things loose for you?
Well, I think the big thing was that I just began to realize that that was the beginning of my understanding that what we knew as the Bible was highly curated.
Yeah.
Um, as I learned more about the church history, where it really began, how it crystallized during, under Constantinople and or Constantine, and then the reason the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden, you know, I just began to realize that there was this vast story that what had been handed me and taught to me as this absolutely divinely orchestrated document that was everything we ever needed to know. It
Mm-hmm.
was clear that there was historical evidence that that was simply not true, and that there was
Right.
human agency in deciding what came down to us as the divinely inspired word of God. And that was this, like, oh shit.
Hmm.
Okay. So there's
Mm-hmm.
so much more to this story. Um, and that, I think, really bothered me, that somebody along the line many somebodies had been making these decisions. And then I began to learn about the actual process of duplicating the texts, and then how it began to be filtered through the lens of the political needs of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And each of these rulers who sponsored another version made sure that it said what they needed it to say. So I began to just realize, it was like, the way I put it in my first book that I wrote, The Divine Arsonist. It was like pulling a thread on my sweater of the belief, and you
Yeah.
pull it, and the whole damn thing eventually falls apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I've heard something. There's a YouTube um, atheist semi personality. I don't know. He does some videos. His name's Kip Davis, and
Hmm.
he's in Canada, and he's a Dead Sea Scrolls expert. And I've watched
Oh
some of his
wow.
stuff, and he talks about how, like, Isaiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls is actually like 3 different books or something like that. That
Wow. Yeah.
there's
Okay.
more to it, and that there's more of an emphasis on a polytheism aspect.
Interesting.
Yeah. So which. to be fair, I always kind of had a difficult time fully reconciling that. I can admit that now. I couldn't admit that then, but because you're just supposed to believe it. But
Yeah.
the whole Trinity thing, the 3 in 1, it doesn't make any sense. You can't be 100% of something 3 times. You can be 33.33 to infinity percent. At some point, somebody's got to go up like 0.01%, get it up there, but yeah, it's a logical impossibility. It doesn't make any sense to be 100% of 3 different things and then call
Yeah.
that one. But I'd like to learn more about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and
Yeah.
it verifies that there was a story and that people copied it down,
Mm-hmm.
just like it we have DVD copies of Star Wars. I mean, you could say, well,
Sure.
first it came out on VHS. Well, actually, first it was in the theater, and then VHS, and then DVD, and then Blu-ray, and then whatever I got off of Napster, and then streaming, right? And
Right.
so you could look back at that chain and see, like, look at this, there's evidence that it was copied. Like, well,
Right.
no, it's the same story, just over and over again. So,
Well, yeah, and it's fascinating. We have the Song of Inanna, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh. I mean, there are many other important texts in the world. And inside of Christianity, there's barely a glance at those. When I left the church and I left when I was around 28, I guess. And then when I had a pretty big shamanic experience, I didn't know that's what it was. Gene, I hadn't been meditating. I'd been reading
all right,
Deepak Chopra, and
now you're talking non-Christianese, so I got to write down words so that way I can look them. Shamanic, SHE.
well, yeah, shaman,
Okay. Sorry,
shaman.
making
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
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 Okay, got
No,
it. Yeah.
so for about 10 years, I had been no longer going to it. Well, I was still kind of going to church with my then wife, but I wasn't in it, but I didn't feel like I had any kind of spiritual practice. And so, I've been reading Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra and some different ones. And I loved the more expansive sense. And, anyway, at some point, a young guy came and worked for me. I was running a mortgage company at the time, and he said, "Would you come to this meditation retreat with me?" And that was 2007. And I'm like, "Wow, I've never learned how to meditate. All these people say that's good stuff." So I said yes. Something in me said, something in me was really afraid of it, and I didn't know why at the time. I'm like, well, what's to be afraid of? You go be
Right.
quiet and stuff. Well, I showed up at this place. It's a couple hours north of here in McCall. It's a beautiful little mountain town, and got to this lodge, and the guy who had invited me picked me up. I'm sure I would have turned around and come back if I'd been driving, but we get there, Gene, and the door opens, and there's this really beautiful woman, the flowy stuff. They had incense in the air. Somebody was tapping on a hand drum. I'm like, oh shit, I'm not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah.
What's getting ready to happen? Well, it turned out it was a shamanic initiation, and they were administering DMT. Now, back then, right?
Yeah.
Back then, it was very secretive, and they made this whole big, we had to promise secrecy, and they would get in trouble. And that, of course, now Joe Rogan and every other fucker is out there talking about it.
Sure. Yeah.
And recklessly, by the way, in my opinion, because it's a really powerful experience. But I had, researching it later and to understand what had just happened, I learned that, especially that particular version of it or whatever, was basically a chemically induced near-death experience. And it was a powerful shattering of what I perceived as myself.
Yeah.
It was the first time, since you grew up religiously, I can use this language. I had grown up with this tremendous fear of God, fear of judgment, fear of all the things.
Well, that's what you're supposed to have, man.
Well, it's the only way to keep it together. But
Yeah.
This was the first time that I had this experience of just completely dissolving into the universe. And it's a very unlike mushrooms and LSD and different things I've experienced since. It was very fast. It's a 15-minute or so journey from end to end. Yeah,
that's
so it's a
short
quick
ride.
But it feels timeless. You felt like it could have been 10 years or something.
Yeah.
But there was a sense of just exploding and then hitting kind of an apex, and at that apex, sort of, there was no me left, and along with that, there was this tremendous sense of peace. I didn't have any big visuals or see a tunnel of light or anything like that, but there was this tremendous sense of release, Gene. And I had lived my life with a lot of fear and stress, and I was an entrepreneur, so I was really under stress. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember kind of floating back down and seeing my body there in the circle of people, and I just looked at that face, and I just felt so much compassion for this guy, because he was clearly
Oh,
just stressed the fuck out,
yeah.
and I looked,
Interesting.
yeah,
You are having compassion for you, but
yeah,
you're like, your feeling is of feeling like you're outside of yourself, looking at yourself from a third person perspective, right?
truly. Yeah, it was so
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, that is
It
interesting.
was almost like I've somersaulted back in, and I woke up and I just had tears pooling in my ears, and
Yeah,
I felt like my whole body was electrified. I had never experienced any kind of, I grew up very sheltered, so I hadn't experienced drugs or anything. And so this
yeah.
was kind of my first medicine experience. But that, that left me with a sense. And like I said on Threads earlier, when you invited me to jump on here with you, I said, I'm not an atheist, but I'm not a
Right.
theist.
Not a
So
theist, but not an atheist. And I'm like, well,
yeah, yeah, it was this tremendous sense of, not a sense of a personal divine being, as in a personality.
mm-hmm,
Um, so there wasn't any of that. There was a sense of tremendous intelligence, and there's a sort of universality of this sense of tremendous intelligence, but also, unlike almost any other religions that we have, with a couple of exceptions, I guess, um, there wasn't a sense of it having of there being a separation between me and the big everything. That's kind of what I've come to call it, or the great
mm-hmm.
unboxable, or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so I have a hard time with, I have a hard time with people who are truly thoroughgoing atheists, only in the sense that they can be as fundamentalist about their belief in no God
Oh,
as
absolutely. Yeah. Well,
fundamentalist
where do you think I
Christians.
got it from? I mean,
Right, right, right.
I'm self-aware enough to be, to know that,
Sure. Well, and I mean, honestly, on the spectrum, I'm much closer to, a thoroughgoing atheist than I would be to a religious person. But it is
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me, when I look at it more philosophically, it's, the human psyche is desperate for certainty. And so
Mm,
whether it's
true.
the certainty of the Nicene Creed, or the certainty of the Book of Mormon, or the certainty of there is absolutely no God, there's no afterlife, there's no nothing, whatever that form of certainty is, it actually takes a fair amount of energy to hold a space of more ambiguity, of, agnosticism, I suppose. Um, so I don't really identify with any particular version of a thing. I would say I'm curious. I would say I try
Yeah.
to experiment with life. If I have a religion, it would be life with a capital L. It's the big
Hmm.
blooming thing that we call life, and it's not pretty. There's much of it that's not pretty. There's much of it that we couldn't call divine, and I think the Hindus have a lot better approach, because their deities are thousands, and many of them are
Mm-hmm.
vicious, terrifying creatures. So
I've
they
seen
don't have the,
pictures, but I don't know
yeah,
a lot about them. I do see them sometimes when I go have lunch with some guys at work
yeah,
at the Indian place. But I don't know much about it. But I'm sure it's going to happen. I'm told that I have a source of a
mm,
deconstructed Hindu, so I'm going
oh,
to
interesting.
pursue that. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Ooh,
But
yeah,
and I do have a friend of mine that from we go all the way back to, I mean, he was first grade, I was kindergartner, and that's when I met him, so we
mm,
go way back. And he was like, the Hindus, like, their gods are actually pretty cool. They're not going to like send you to hell or anything if you don't believe in them. And
yeah,
he's like, it's
yeah.
pretty interesting. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'll have to hear more about that. So hell, maybe I'll invite him on the podcast and he can tell me what he knows.
I'd love to
But
listen to that one. Wow.
yeah. Let's talk some more drugs. So, because like you, I didn't do a whole lot of things whenever I was growing up. I might have, growing up in a small town, the typical hardest drug was usually in a field with somebody's beer that they got. And I only, I only did that a couple of times. Although I will say that was like the first time that I heard Metallica's Black Album was in a field, and it sounded amazing. It was underneath
Hell
the
yeah.
night sky, and this guy had his truck. It was like an old Chevy truck, and had a really good sound system, and he was playing this new. I'm like, what is that? He's like, that's the new Metallica. I'm like, what? And so anyway, but might have had a few beers there, a little bit of Strawberry Hill, because that's all kids could get their hands on for whatever reason.
Right.
Back in the
Ripple.
day, maybe some Purple Passion if you're really lucky. And I've just probably totally dated myself. But then after leaving, then I was more open, and like in Missouri that we legalized cannabis. And so I was like, well, yeah, let's try that out. I was like, oh, well, this is great,
Mm-hmm.
and I may have, I can't say for sure that I have done this because it's not fully legal, but I may have tried some mushrooms, which I thought was an interesting experience because I didn't get the fractals, sounds, anything like that. I didn't get any of that.
Not
I
everybody
did.
does. What was your experience?
Well, I had who I would call a shaman. I would a guy that helped me out through this because he's an old school hippie. Like, I mean, there's probably not a drug he hasn't done. But he's, I texted. I'm like, how much should I take? He's like, start off with half a gram. I'm like,
Oh,
okay.
wow. Yeah,
So
that's
eat
not much.
half a gram. He said, wait an hour. I'm like, okay. Because at first I was like, is this too much? And I had like 2 grams. He's like, yes, probably too much for a first timer. I'm like, okay. So did half a gram. Nothing.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't really feel anything. He's like,
Yeah.
all right, take another half a gram. I'm like, okay. And then I said, I still don't hear anything, but I am having a hard time walking. And this text took me 10 minutes to compose. And so, and he said, yeah, he said, it depends on where you want to go, but he's like, you could either write it out or, and I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to let it go. So, the rest of I took like a whole day to do this because I had the day off, and my wife had taken the kids to, the amusement park for the day, the nearby amusement park, and came home, and she was like, so how was your day? And I told her what I did, and she's like, so you stayed at home and did drugs? I'm like, well, call it an experimentation of, yeah. Anyway, but but the one thing that really got me was that for me, and I'm maybe because I'm a musician, I relate so much to this, but there's always like this window of depression that kind of like sits around with me, which was always helpful to tap into for writing and creating. I think any good art has some sadness in it, right? And after my little trip with psilocybin was over, I noticed that I couldn't even find that door, that window of depression. It was just like, well, where'd it go? I can't tap into it. I mean, sometimes it's a really tiny window, just a little bit of sadness, and or like after my mom died a few years back, it was a garage door, like double bay, both open. It was huge. I couldn't find it at all, and I was just like, wow, that's very interesting.
It is. How long did that persist?
Oh, still. I mean, this wasn't that long ago. I think, probably, yeah, it's been a few months, so it's still mostly there. There's a Netflix special with is it Michael Pollan, the guy that so, and he
How to Change
I
Your
don't
Mind?
remember the name of it. Yeah, How to Change Your Mind, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
and there is one about psilocybin, and that they do talk to some people. That even this one woman, she was Catholic, and she was talking about how it really helped her with anxiety and depression. And what I ended up texting my friend after everything kind of went away, I said, I see why this is illegal now, because why would anyone why would the government want anyone to have access to something they could grow in their backyard and make them feel better?
Right. Jesus,
you
right.
know, not to sound too RFK Jr. on this one, but that's true. I mean, that's a, same with cannabis. I think cannabis is closer to medicine,
Oh my
and
God,
I think
for sure.
alcohol's closer to a toxin. So
Yeah, no question.
yeah.
By the
So
way, if it ever calls your name again, I mean, I think somewhere around, I've probably done more than 5 grams of mushrooms at a time, and that's a lot.
mhm.
That's a
It sounds
fucking
like a
lot.
lot. Yeah.
That's a lot. 2.5 to 3 grams. You, I think that that would likely be a pretty profound experience in some way. I
Mhm.
can't, and it's interesting. My brother, who's kind of has a very technical mind. He's been techie for a long time.
Mhm.
So a really kind of a heavy lock on the left brain function. He really struggled with psilocybin in terms of it doing anything, and
Yeah.
I don't I don't ever, for one thing, I never push any of this. And I think a lot of what's going on in the manosphere podcast world is genuinely reckless.
Yeah.
Like people talking about everyone needs to do a heroic dose. Like, that is such bullshit. It is reckless.
Mhm.
It's not a good idea.
No.
Especially not without guidance. I've known people who have done shit. I have a friend here in town who got with me about 3 months after he had done a lot of DMT and a lot of mushrooms in the same afternoon, and he just about didn't make it back.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's, again, he was not mentally stable before that. He dealt with a lot of depression and anxiety, and he thought he listened to fucking Rogan or something. He thought, okay,
Yeah.
I'll do this. And yeah, and again, I say that just to say I'm not an evangelist for any of this stuff. I think it can be really useful, but I also caution people who are just like, their hair's on fire. Where can I
Oh,
find
yeah.
it? Like, yeah, just tone that down a little bit.
Yeah, no, I have a friend of mine that he won't touch cannabis because he used to smoke it a lot, and then whenever he was
Okay.
younger, and he said I would get really paranoid,
Yeah.
and then I I looked that up. I'm like, well, that's interesting. I'd like to know more, and then I find out that there is a percentage of people that they don't do well with cannabis, that they
Right.
do get a bit of a psychosis and a
Yeah.
paranoia with them. I'm like, okay, well, I guess it's not for you then, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Right.
just much in the same way that some people like alcohol. My wife hates the taste of alcohol. She just, if it tastes like alcohol, she's not interested because
Really?
she
Okay.
doesn't like the alcohol taste of it.
Yeah.
So, um, I think the closest we got was after the Barbie movie came out. There was these Barbie pop-ups, and there were just bars that were like all pink, and they had fun things. And so we went out with another couple, and whatever they
Yeah.
had, it was something called the pink drink, and she seemed to like that. So,
Okay. Nice.
but it didn't taste too alcohol-y, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so
Yeah.
everybody's got their own thing. And like you, I'm
Oh,
also not an evangelist. I think that you should, that should be something that you come about safely. And I mean,
yeah.
there's, the world's changed. Like this guy that I knew, that he lived down the street. Their family lived down the street from us, where I grew up, and they had a son, and the son was an addict to fentanyl, and
Wow. Jesus.
he took too much after he'd been clean for several months. He was
Wow.
kind of on the right path. He got him a job. Things were going good. And he took some, and he went to sleep, and he never woke up,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and so I get nervous about that. That's where I'm a little bit more interested in regulated substances from
Hmm.
from a purity standpoint.
Sure.
That, to me, that makes sense. I like that idea. But to just recklessly go try something because some podcaster,
Yeah.
oh, whoops, some podcasters, said to do it. And yes, the manosphere, it worries me that I'm like, guys, you don't have to do crazy things to prove you can show a little bit of integrity. That's cool.
Yeah.
Try that first,
Yeah.
before you go on a heroic dose of DMT, you know. Uh,
Hey,
uh,
this is a pretty big segue, but I would love to pick your brain a bit about original sin, if you don't mind. And if that
yeah.
doesn't fit, then don't. But
This is, I mean, my segues are usually accidental, so
okay.
I don't usually write down questions ahead of
Yeah.
time. I just kind of let it flow. So yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk original sin. Yeah. What?
Well, it's just
Go ahead,
interesting to
caller.
me. Yeah, go ahead, caller. First time caller, a long time listener.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just interesting to me. Gene, as I'm watching a lot of people, and I see a lot of them right now, and I appreciate the effort of a lot of people who are still Christians, who are trying to be more and more progressive, especially differentiating themselves from Christian nationalists
Mm-hmm.
and all of the shit that's going on right now.
Right.
And I really appreciate that effort. And so I have plenty of friends who would fit in that category of, kind of more leftist Christians or,
Mm-hmm.
very much more progressive. And here's what I almost want to ask them though. When without, and again, I just I don't have an evangelistic bone in me anymore of trying to get people to believe something different. But
Mm-hmm.
those who are putting themselves out there saying, "Hey, we're not of the type that is causing the harm in the world." I'm like,
Right.
do you still hold original sin? Well, yes, of course. I'm like, well, all right then we're going to I have a problem with that because of where that belief comes from and how it affects every single thing. It literally, if a Christian is holding the belief in original sin, which you really can't not do and be called a modern Christian, based on what I've seen of the Gnostic Gospels and some of the ones that didn't make it into what we call the Bible now, Jesus
Mm-hmm.
Christ didn't teach original sin. In fact, quite the opposite. But my point is, original sin for me, that was one of the most difficult things to let go of,
Mm.
to come to the point of going, oh, we actually aren't broken, essentially,
Yeah.
intrinsically. We don't need a savior. And without that doctrine, the whole damn thing falls apart, Gene.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that whoever the person Jesus Christ was, or the collection of people, or however that came to be, that's not to say that there wasn't a body of teachings that is really worth paying attention to. But the way it got curated and passed down to us, that doctrine of original sin and the story of how it happened in the garden and all that,
Mm-hmm.
that has held together a specious and what has become, and really hasn't ever not been, an abusive religion down through the many centuries it's been around.
Right. Oh, it's a big one, I think, because
Yeah.
it caps off the beginning of, well, the beginning of the Bible, and it
Mhm.
also caps off the beginning of most religious doctrine, as you've mentioned. Um, but you got to really go back to what the text says, right? And I don't know if you feel the need to pull it up, but I
Go ahead and,
basically,
yeah, what are we
uh,
looking for?
just Genesis, you know.
Oh, sure.
Hold on. Let me get out my weighty. I have a Catholic study Bible here, which
Oh,
is
wow.
it's it's fun, and I am not going to use that because my readers are upstairs. So I will go. I will go to Bible Gateway, uh, and
I,
just
I presume you grew up with the King James version. Is that true or not?
I did. Then whenever I could think for myself, I would switch to NIV because I got tired of reading Shakespeare stuff. And then because I just didn't like the words. I mean, like I don't, I forsooth just all that crap. I didn't care for it. Is there a version you prefer to read out of?
Oh, I don't care. No,
Yeah.
since you're pulling it up.
Yeah. Let's split the
Yeah.
difference with the new King James version. So I think we're going to have to get into chapter 2,
Well, it's
right?
funny while you're looking that up, that's what's interesting to me, is to watch people who want to get into all these wrangles about finer points of doctrine and the different versions of the scripture and what this one meant. I mean, I grew up in the middle of all that, Gene, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, listen, if you can't grapple with all of this stuff, is derivative from the basic idea that humans are intrinsically inherently broken
Right.
when they show up and must have a savior. And
Right.
like, if you, everything, all the rest of this stuff is just fine tooth combing details that don't really even matter. If you can talk about that, if you're
Yeah.
willing to question it, then we're going to get somewhere. But otherwise, like, this is why I won't have conversations with most Christians anymore, is because I'm like, listen, I don't have an agenda to get you to quit being a Christian, but I would love to have some honesty about this doctrine. Because
Right.
if we can't get past that, then the rest of this is just, honestly, it's a waste of my fucking time.
Right. I think that's completely fair to ask those questions. And so here I am, Genesis 2. I'm going to start in verse 7 because it says, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Verse 8, the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge, of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil. We'll come back to that. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Because it just talks about how, God says it's not good for them to be alone. And then we have the whole rib incident. And then they were both naked and were not ashamed. Good for them. So scoot along to verse 3. Now the serpent, not the devil, the serpent. We make the connection to serpent and devil later, much later in the Bible, was more cunning than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees in the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God had said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. And then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that in that day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And so then she ate of it. Okay, we know the rest. So here's my thing. If I go back to what it said in the previous chapter, right, it says, the tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge, awareness of good and evil. So they didn't have awareness of good or evil before they were presented with the temptation. It's like giving a baby some psilocybin and saying, don't eat that. Right? So I have a hard time just getting over free will, because how did they, if they had no ability, according to the myth, to even determine if God was lying to them, because how are they supposed to differentiate between who's lying, God or the serpent?
Sure.
Then how could they possibly make an informed, rational decision about this? And
that's a really good point.
And then things start falling apart after that. And then if you get into like, you know what, that's just a metaphor. It's just an allegory about how mankind is broken and we need something else. Then Jesus didn't need to die for my sin.
Totally.
It's that simple. I mean, I don't know any other way to look at that. Because I feel like after that, you're just getting into more church tradition about, we're broken. A lot of that goes back to John Calvin anyway, about the wickedness, mankind being inherently evil. Go to your local nursery at the hospital and look at those kids and you tell me how evil they are. Like, just because, is evil a state that you're born into, or is it a state that you become through your actions? I don't believe evil being a thing. Just as good isn't a thing, it's an action, or it's a descriptor, but it's not an entity. And so I have a hard time reconciling all of that. My other big problem with progressive Christianity, I mean, I love them. I love those guys because they are accepting, they're welcoming, and they're not knocking on my door. So, I mean, we got no problems. They're not handing out shit to my daughter whenever she goes at work, which happens. Where she brings me home stuff. I've got a box behind me full of things that she's brought me over time. But so they're not doing that, and that's noble for them, and I commend them for being welcoming and being inclusive. but you're still tied to the rest of the Bible that is, I mean, how do you answer that? And I haven't gotten great answers. I will just say that my personal perspective is that you have, according to the story, there was no way for, man and woman to be able to make a sound decision because they hadn't received the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah.
And so how can you deny yourself if you don't even know who's lying to you? Like, you have no ability to do that. And then
Right.
after that, original sin just falls apart for me. So I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, I mean, I think that's an excellent point. Clearly, I've let go of original sin, so there's no argument from me on
Right.
that point. What was really useful for me, Gene, was reading Joseph Campbell during that period of time that I was really struggling with these things and knowing I was letting them go, but didn't know how to let them go. I
Mm-hmm.
loved Joseph Campbell's inclusive approach. And it felt like, without placing any of the texts on pedestals, he what he didn't do is roll it all flat like a pancake and go, "There's nothing to any of this stuff. It's just a bunch of garbage."
Mm-hmm.
He's like, "No, these things have tremendous value when it comes to understanding the myths." And he's like, and I loved his phrase. The one phrase that probably helped me more than any was, "Literalism is idolatry."
Yes, it's true, because you end up
Right?
making an idol out of the book itself,
Exactly.
and all the words that go along with it. I could not agree more, because
Right?
it ends
And
up becoming,
ah,
yeah, because they put the book and the thought that goes around thinking that way
mhm.
higher than the humans they're supposed to be reaching out to.
Always.
You know.
Always. Yeah. And then we get into these insane debates over what's meant by this certain phrase, because every phrase has to be literally equally true if you hold it to be the divinely inspired word of God. And so we end up just getting into these weird tangles and mental gymnastics. And frankly, taking an approach more like Joseph Campbell's was so helpful for me. It began to let me let it go and not have to destroy it, not have to
Mm-hmm.
just shit on all of it, but go, oh, I don't have, this no longer has to hold its place in my life.
Yeah.
Um, that in any way holds me back from learning more about the rest of life, learning more about other belief systems and all of that. And I'll say that phrase, literalism is idolatry, that holds true across political spectrums, across religious spectrums. Understanding that the more that we get fixated on a certain, this is why for me, anything that ends in an ism or an is is
Yeah.
its own version of a religion. It meaning it's
Yeah.
not about God, but capitalism is America's religion at this point. It's
Oh,
it's
yes.
above it's above
Absolutely.
Christianity by a long way.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Yeah. I also still find value in the book. It's
Hmm.
just I pick from it what I want to take with me, or sometimes it's just stuck in my head. But one thing that often
Sure,
comes up is, like, somebody says, "Well, I'd like to do this or that or whatever," and I'll say, "Well, you have not, because you ask not." And I just looked up. It's James 4:2.
sure.
You lust and you do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you
Right.
do not have because you do not ask. That's it's like, well,
Yeah,
yeah, maybe I
yeah.
should just go for it. Maybe I should just, well, and I came across that this week because I got some big news about a guy that he was the last of the three guys that hired me at where I work,
Mm,
and super intelligent guy. But I've had my issues with him because he's sometimes has been difficult to work under. But
mhm,
yet, in the last few years, I've seen him transform because he got married, and actually I officiated for them, which was pretty awesome. And then he uh, brought a step kid into the marriage, and then he and his wife, they had a baby. And I've seen this guy just, like, change into a different
mm,
person.
mm,
Well, at one point he had interviewed at Google years ago, And being a super smart guy, I'm sure he probably thought that he had a pretty good chance, but for whatever reason, they didn't want him. And I said, well, do you think you're going to try again? And this has been like 5 or 6 years, but, and back then he's like, no, he's like, I tried, I shot my shot, I'm just going
Yeah.
to stay here, and then now
Mhm.
I've seen him transform and change. Well, I find
Mhm.
out on Monday, I find out that he's leaving. He's we've worked together for almost 10 years, and he's going to go, he took a chance on him. He's going to go do something else
Wow.
at a smaller place. Same type of work, but he's going to be a big fish in a little pond rather
Yeah.
than a fish in a big pond. And I went up and I'm like, whoa, I got to go go talk to him about this. And I'm like, dude, what's going on? And he's like, I just thought I'd take a chance on myself, and that ties into, you don't have because you don't ask. Like, he
Right.
finally chose to ask rather than leaning back on that. That one time I got my heart broken and I never took another chance. He decided to do it this time.
Yeah.
And so I can't help but be proud of him and happy for him. And it's just been excellent. And so I have these references in my head that float around that
Sure.
come
Me
from the
too.
Bible. And I think it's okay to lean on the Bible or whatever text, and still pull information from that.
Yeah.
Um, pardon me. But, I just don't believe it's divine, because I don't think, if there's a God out there, then he is one. He's a terrible writer, just fucking awful. Because you go through the Old Testament, you're like, did you have to repeat everything, every single verse, and then just change like one word, like, for the
Yeah.
pigs do this, for the cows do this, like, just tell me all the things. And by the way, this applies to this, and this. Okay, we could have narrowed one chapter all the way down to basically a verse or two. So yeah, shitty writer. But also, I don't, who Matt Dillahunty is?
I don't think so.
No, he's old school atheist, been around for a while. Since I feel like he bridges the gap between Dillahunty.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting.
Okay, so I feel like he bridges the gap from new atheism of 2010 era to today, which I would call second wave new atheism. But
Okay.
hopefully someone picks that up and I get credit for that. Second wave new atheism. All right, so this week has been challenging, to say the least.
Well, yeah.
We've had anniversary of 9/11 today. Yesterday there was multiple shootings. Actually, I think there's been multiple things going on today on some campuses.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing that kind of ties me a little bit back to the original sin discussion and
Yeah.
Jesus. And I just remembered what Matt Dillahunty said. He said, if I die and I stand before God and find out that he's real, actually this might have been Hitchens now that I think about it, but whoever it was said, well, you did a terrible job of trying to convince me, because you were kind of all over the map and things of that nature. But oh well,
Yeah.
at least I said it. I'm going to cut all that out. But it's been a challenging week. Had
Yeah.
9/11 anniversary. There's been some lockdowns happen on college campuses today. We had the Charlie Kirk thing yesterday. There was a shooting in Evergreen, and I don't know how many kids were. I think 4 were injured. I don't know if any of them died.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. We are supposedly a Christian nation, and yet all of this shit happens.
Mm-hmm.
How much more do we got to lean in to get there,
Right.
to get it all fixed? Or, hear me out. I know this sounds crazy, but maybe it should all be abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should try to just truly look at each other as humans and say, you have worth and I have worth just because we exist. And from my non-biblical perspective, we're here kind of by accident, which makes, I like accidents. I love accidents, because when something accidentally happens and then you get something out of it, that's pretty unique, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know there's lots of people, lots of Christians, and probably other faiths too, that just can't get over the idea of how did we get here?
Yeah.
And I also know other people that are like, doesn't matter. I'm here. what do I do about that? I
Right.
have no control over that. I've heard an argument that I really, it's hard to wrap your head around unless you're into science fiction. Then it probably makes it a little easier. But the idea is, premise one is something cannot come from nothing. Premise two is something exists. And then you get into the conclusion is that, well, since something exists and something cannot come from nothing, then something has always existed. Therefore, you don't have a need for a creator. This is just infinitely going back in time. Something has been there, and infinitely going into the future, something will be there. And I get it. It's a little bit of a mind fuck. You hear that and you're like, holy crap. But I also have a kind of a hard time arguing against it
Yeah.
because we are technically infinitely in the past of the future. Um, and I am on no mushrooms right now. So,
Well, let me just
you
say,
know,
tying into that, Gene, one thing we see in the crystallized version of Christianity that's being held out for us right now in this country as some sort of a standard is a tremendous need to control. And I'm not even
mhm,
talking about control other people. I'm talking about control in the sense of knowing for absolutely certain that this is true. We know this to be true.
right. Hmm.
Um, the trouble is, even what you just said, like that I can feel a little bit like spinny and nauseous when I go back before the
Hmm.
Big Bang, before the that, like my human brain, the human psyche, because we are bounded by not just birth and death, we're bounded by when we begin to come into self-awareness. So let's say
Yeah.
around one, maybe we begin to become more aware of ourselves. We eventually learn that we have a name. Then we begin to be aware that we are separate from our mother and
Right.
father and other people. But then there's this tremendous awareness of our own deaths, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
we hit our age group, we're Gen X dudes,
Hmm.
and you hit our age group and we start to become more aware that we don't have infinite runway. What
I've
I
noticed
find
that. Yeah.
isn't that something? What I find fascinating is that almost all of the major cultures on Earth have had an apocalypse story. There's almost all of them have some version of a, like, the Norse had their, oh wow, why is that name getting away from me? You probably remember it. But there's always some great story of the great clash that ends all things. Well, what's
Hmm.
fascinating when you look at it through a more Jungian perspective, or psychology is, yeah, we individuals are so stuck on our own tiny arc in the span of whatever we call
Right.
eternity. There's this
Yeah.
tiny little arc that's called my beginning and my end. And we
Right.
so fear our end that it's almost
Yeah.
as if we need to have a cosmology and a worldview that says, when I die, everything dies with me. And that's the ego
Yeah.
talking, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get that. I mean, um, we're really uncomfortable with the words or the phrase,
Yeah.
I don't know. I
Yes.
don't know what came before
Yes.
the Big Bang. I've heard some very interesting hypothesis slash theories,
Yeah.
like one called black hole bounce, where a couple of black holes were kind of like near each other and caused such an incredible gravitational force that it ended up causing the Big Bang, which caused
Sure.
our universe. But there was something before that. And I always like to add the word yet at the end of that, because there's
Yeah.
been so many things that we just didn't know, but we didn't know that we didn't know yet. And then we learn new information. And I come home from work today, and the first thing my son, my smart, curious son says to me, he says, "Did you hear yesterday that they announced that they think they found evidence of life on Mars?" And I'm like, I did hear that. And in
Mhm.
fact, that was the one cool thing from yesterday. As bad as yesterday was,
Yeah.
I heard about that. And NASA said, well, we drilled some core samples of this rock that was a little sus. And we looked at it. Yeah, that's what the kids say. I try to be cool. And I watched the video clip, and the guy was like, we find no other explanation for this except that this looks to be evidence of organic matter once on Earth or on Mars.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's fascinating. And
Yeah.
then I said to him, what does that mean to you? He's like, I don't know. People are saying it's cool. And I said, well, think about it this way. There could be somebody else out there in another galaxy, in
Mhm.
another universe, and they're looking for us right now. And they're wondering, like, hey, maybe somebody's out there and we just haven't found him yet.
Yeah.
And do I know this for certain? Absolutely not. I have nothing more than, the evidence of experts and their data and some rocks,
Yeah.
basically. But it's fun to think about, right? And the thing about that is those are things we can touch, and we didn't know yet until yesterday
Right.
that we have just a little bit more information, a little bit more piece of the puzzle. And this only comes with time, and it only comes with fucking around and finding out. And this is why we have to take back FAFO, because
Yeah.
that used to be a bad thing. Yes, or it can be a bad thing. You can take too much DMT. You can fuck around and find out. You can take too much fentanyl, and it's really not that much, and it's going to be bad. Or you can fuck around and find out and put a goddamn rover on Mars and go drill some holes and see what's in there. And
Have happy
then you're
accidents.
like, wow, look at
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I think that's, if anything, can't we all just agree that we should at least continue to explore and ask questions and
Yes.
we shouldn't fight any battles over it. Sure as hell shouldn't kill anybody over it.
Oh my God.
But, but I love the idea of digging in the dirt, finding some new stuff and saying, hey, what's this?
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
I love it.
All right.
Well, I love spending time with you, and I'm glad to have met you, Gene. So I hope we continue our friendship, because it's been refreshing to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's been great, and I'd love to have you back on. We can,
Anytime.
maybe we can do shrooms together and see how that goes.
Live stream the experience.
Yeah, and then everybody will be like, "Nope, not doing that."
Not doing that.
All right, Jacob,
Hey,
thank you
thanks
so
so
much
much.
for joining me today. All right.
Pleasure.